Hello and welcome to CollectaThought, the show where I talk about video games, and today we're going to be talking about the Alan Wake Remaster, or basically we're going to be talking about Alan Wake because it's basically a very bland remaster. Alan Wake, the original game, came out in 2010, and this remaster comes out then 11 years later. And a funny thought I had was, wow, there was a really big break between Alan Wake and Control. And then I reminded myself that there was a game called Quantum Break a few years ago. Also an Xbox exclusive, which is important to mention because Alan Wake was an Xbox exclusive for a while. And it didn't actually come to PC where I played it until 2012. And I'll be honest, I was a bit young for Alan Wake when I first played it and I just kinda skipped the cutscene, so I thought that this would be a good experience to go back to it and actually sit through the story and see if I like it. And I guess we can start with that, the story of Alan Wake, which is fairly unique as far as video game stories go, focusing on a writer who's working on a book he's been having trouble writing or finishing because of various reasons that I'm not gonna spoil. But the basic idea of the game is that Alan Wake is being haunted by this book and its characters, creating this survival horror setting where the reality of the game intercepts with the psyche of our main character, and I would say that's probably one of the best things about this game, the way it blends what is real to our characters and what isn't. It creates a level of tension that allows the game to be able to pop in and out of these more tense scenes at will, given they can happen almost at any time given the psychological state of Alan Wake. That being said, Alan Wake isn't really the scariest game, and I'll go into that in the gameplay bit, but purely in terms of story, I do understand the cult following this game has. It's a game that is aware of what it is and wears a lot of its influences on its sleeve. From Twin Peaks to Stephen King, it ends up being a horror game that also isn't afraid to be a bit silly at times, with some characters being outright comedic relief, like for example the two old rockers in the town that are a bit kooky, or your manager who is a very stereotypical New Yorker. And personally, I think the story ends up benefiting a lot from this, as one of my major problems when I played this game for the first time was that it came off a bit pretentious and overly dark and edgy. And at the beginning of the game it's easy to get that idea, especially since at the beginning even the comic relief characters feel like they're just being looked down upon by the game rather than being there as actual comedic relief, or even just there as a reference to something else, like the log lady who's, like the log lady in Twin Peaks. Except she's not holding a log, she's holding a light, which light is a big deal here, but once again, we will talk about it in the gameplay. But speaking of the game kinda looking a bit overly dark and edgy, I'll be honest, for a bit I did think my opinion was gonna go there again. But as the game's intentions become more clear, you can see that the game is not actually looking down on these characters, but actually it's more of a situation where Alan's character at the beginning of the game being a bit grating. He's in a big slump at the beginning of the game, and it isn't until he's called to action that my perspective of him starting to change. And besides that, also the story just becomes a lot more interesting, as Alan finds himself forced to write the book, and also of course that affecting the real world of the game, and how that becomes a very meta narrative of Alan having a lot of the times have to deal with the consequences of what he writes, and that kind of being projected as the gameplay. And I really enjoy that. I would say some of my favorite games do very similar things, like for example Silent Hill also kind of mixes the subconscious and the real world in a way that makes you always be on edge about what is real and isn't in the context of the game. That being said, there are a couple of things that do throw me off here, and a major one is Alan Wake's voice acting. This game actually has some fairly good voice acting overall, but I do think Alan's voice acting, while fitting and maybe even purposeful, it did come out a bit too monotone for me, especially for a game where someone is going through, a lot of emotional stress. That being said, it is a minor complaint, and most of my complaints are now gonna come in the form of the gameplay. Not to be mean, but it is kind of the weaker part of the game, even though it is still fairly enjoyable. So let's get into it. And it's your average third-person survival horror game with a gimmick. The gimmick here being that you have to shine light on these very shadowy looking enemies to basically expose them, and then you can shoot them like in any other survival horror game. And to be fair, it is a nice gimmick, it is contextualized from the story, but it also makes the gameplay a bit repetitive in my opinion. The reason for that is, because of this gimmick, a big part of the gameplay will just be aiming at your enemy until they are weakened enough by the light that you can shoot them and finish them off with a couple shots. And while the game gives you other ways around this, with items like flares and flashbangs, and some environmental hazards that show up very rarely, so the main gameplay loop will be walking backwards while shining a light at the enemy until you can shoot them. Usually 3 shots for the normal guys, and about 6 for the bigger guys, but in that case you should probably be using a shotgun or a rifle, which leads me to the next problem, which is a very prevalent thing in horror games or survival horror specifically, which is giving you too much ammo. Because you get so much ammo, things like flare guns and flashbangs end up feeling more like get out of jail free cards for when you really mess up, rather than regular items for you to use throughout the gameplay. And I think that also comes about simply because there is a big disparity between what each weapon does, with this being brought upon by the gimmick, since firearms are very dependent on you being able to also illuminate the enemy, making things like flashbangs and flare guns incredibly overpowered, as they can one-shot almost every enemy in the game. Leading me to talk about one of the main mechanics of this game, which is the flashlight. Of course, this is what allows you to illuminate the enemies most of the time, and it works on batteries, which is a consumable, but it also recharges on its own, and fast enough that you can just kind of run around a little bit while during combat. I almost never felt the need to use it outside of boss fights, which have a tendency of regenerating their kind of shadow power. But even then, it's not particularly hard to get away with not using it at all. And for that, I think that maybe because you get so many of these batteries, it would have probably been better to have a system where it just doesn't recharge, and it makes using the lantern a much more limited and important asset. It would have definitely raised the difficulty, which, speaking of that, raising the difficulty you would think would make the game a lot harder, but it actually changes a lot of stuff that I think just makes it a bit more boring. It makes that protection of the shadows take longer to break with the light, which means that, yeah, I guess it can force you into using the batteries more, but it also just makes the combat also last longer without actually creating more action, which I think makes the combat more boring, right? When I was playing this game again, I was thinking, maybe I'm gonna recommend people play this on hard, but after trying hard, it doesn't really seem like that's a particularly good option either. I think these problems are definitely problems of the time. This is what games were like back then. You had regenerating health and you had regenerating everything. There wasn't a whole lot of resource management. Even the Resident Evil games of that time suffer from this. But that's no excuse, especially since this is a remaster. The other big problem is also the enemy variety. Like I said before, there are 2 main types, which is the regular enemies and big enemies. There's some variations, like big enemies with different weapons, or smaller enemies that move really fast. But overall, you're gonna be mostly seeing the regular enemies, who become very repetitive very fast, as in you point a light at them and then you shoot them 3 times with a pistol. Bosses are a lot better actually, even though they follow the same formula at the end of the day. What makes them cool is they're usually big, powerful things, forcing you to move around a lot more. Especially as later on in the game they also introduce inanimate objects as projectile enemies. And at the end of the day, the gameplay overall feels fine. It just could be set up better. You know, maybe lean more into the survival horror aspects with a more punishing resource management. If you played the new Resident Evil games, this will feel fairly easy. Yes, Resident Evil is the only other survival horror. That's the one I'll use as a reference for everything. If you want another example, another big one, Dead Space 3. That one also sucked with resource management because it was trying to be a co-op game. But let's not get derailed here. Anyways, I wanted to talk about also the collectibles. It's kind of a minor thing, but the collectibles range from being fairly important to being fairly inconsequential. There's manuscript pages, which makes sense given the story, but then we also have coffee thermos that don't do anything. Collecting them is literally just upping a number in the collectible thing. I don't like collectibles like that, and I think it's a bit of a waste of time, and there's like 100 of them. The other thing I wanted to talk about that maybe I should have talked about during the story, but also related to the collectibles because a lot of them count as collectibles, is a lot of the diegetic storytelling, primarily here through TV and the radio, as sometimes you'll be able to run across one of these and turn them on, getting a little bit of story for it. The problem for me is they go on for quite a bit and they can't be listened to on the go. You have to kind of stand there and listen to them, which I think breaks the pacing and makes the game a bit more tedious than it needs to be, especially since this game already has quite a bit of unneeded walking around with nothing to do, especially in the more open settings. I haven't talked about this yet, but there's settings where you can drive a car in an almost open world setting. It's very linear, but you can like stop at certain locations and go find collectibles or ammo depending on the situation, even though once again you have very little incentive to do so because you're probably already stocked up on ammo anyways, and being inside the car is probably the safest place to be during these sections. Regardless, getting back to it, it is just something that breaks up the pacing, and if you could just keep playing while you go away, which wouldn't make sense, I get it, within the world, but it would make me, you know, be able to consume that information without kind of just having to sit there not doing anything. Now, I don't want to go on about the driving bits, but it made me think of a game that I hadn't played back then, so I probably couldn't connect the dots like that, but it reminded me of Deadly Premonition. It made me realize that Alan Wake is kind of like Deadly Premonition, or I guess the other way would be the proper way to say it, since Deadly Premonition is the most recent game out of the two. And to me it's so funny because clearly both towns of both games are based on Twin Peaks. Both are survival horror games with really bad driving physics. But one of these games is a cult classic for being a pretty good game, while the other one is kind of a cult classic for the opposite reason. And I'll be honest, I think I like Deadly Premonition more. But that's not to put this game down. But now, to kind of talk about the remaster bit of this game, I have to talk about the graphics, which look better, but it's very marginally. It's in a way that, wow, I don't think the PS3 and Xbox 360 could run this, but also it would be the type of game that if it came out on the PS4 and Xbox One, people would be saying it looks like a PS3 game. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing, especially if the game is priced accordingly. But I'll talk about that in the recommendations. Regardless, the major difference here is probably in the resolution of textures and the character models, specifically the face, which is good. Alan looks a lot more like the real life counterpart that also shows up in the game. Yeah, Remedy likes doing that. But despite that, you still have the old animations, and I mean facial animations, not gameplay ones, because gameplay ones have actually aged quite well, surprisingly. But The facial ones, when characters talk, it is a bit robotic compared to what we get with AAA games today. Since Alan Wake came before a time, facial tracking became a standard for games of this budget. In fact, if you look at the timeline, Alan Wake came out almost exactly a year before LA Noire, a game that sold itself on that innovation. And that might be a deterrent for some, so just be aware. Personally, I don't care. I like some older games. Not that Alan Wake is the oldest game, but it is over a decade now, which makes me feel old, so that's enough proof for me. Regardless though, let's finish this off, and I'll be giving Alan Wake a 7 out of 10. It's a game where the story, it's pretty interesting, but I'll be honest, it didn't really resonate with me on a deeper level like other similar stories have in the past, but I still quite enjoyed it. And while the gameplay is flawed and a bit stuck in the time that it came out originally, it is still mechanically enjoyable enough. And for those reasons, I would still highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of the survival horror genre, as I do think its unique gimmick does still add a little bit to it that makes it worth playing if you've never tried it before. That being said, if you already beat the game before, I don't think this remake is the reason for you to come back. It doesn't add anything particularly new besides including the 2 DLCs that came out from Alan Wake, not to be confused with American Nightmare, which is like its own thing. And the minor changes it does at $30 I can't really recommend. I was also gonna mention that there was this bug where there would be weird flashes of light in the middle of the forest for no reason that weren't there in the original, but I think they already patched it, so I'm not gonna bother mention it besides this. At $30 though, I think that if you're a returning player, it's not particularly worth it, especially on PC where you probably already played it at a fairly good frame rate, or if you didn't, then your computer now probably does, and I think the difference between this and the last one is really not worth doing the upgrade if you already own one. But if you are a new player, then, I don't think it's the worst deal ever. Except for the fact the original Alan Wake goes on sale for like $2 on Steam sometimes. But it's up to you, I guess. Regardless, just go for whatever option fits your budget better. You're not gonna be getting a bad experience either way. But regardless of whether or not you play this game, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing and commenting, liking, all the things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day, and goodbye. If I sounded weird or messy in this review, it's because I had to stop recording a bunch of times because I'm having really bad food poisoning. But I really had to record this today, so F my life. Bye.